Hello, my name is Xander. Welcome back to the Python Code Challenge. This is Python Code Challenge 3, repeating string characters. Let's get straight to this. So we need to write a new function that passes in a new string. So we're going to build a new function. That function should return a string, the string that we entered, plus an extra character. So the string should return a string whereby each character of the original string has been repeated once. So if we input a string, the word to, TWO, into this function, what will get returned is TTWWOO. So hopefully that makes sense. That was the problem description for the challenge. So by all means, pause, have a little think, see if you can solve the challenge. So I will take you through a solution. Now, there are many solutions here. So we'll go through a single solution. If you're happy with that, you can jump off there. Else, if you want to know some of the other solutions to this challenge, we'll go ahead and we'll kind of build up to a final solution. So there's around about 3 or 4 different steps or different ways we can approach this challenge. Hopefully you've had a go at this challenge and maybe you've got a result. So let's just go through a solution to begin with, and then we'll move on to have a look at and kind of build up to some other solutions. So let's go ahead and make a new function here. I've just called this double char. I've got _2 here because this is just a second example that I'll show you in the next part of this tutorial. And then it's going to take in a string. So we've got a parameter here, str. And then we're going to, first of all, create a new variable here called result. So what's going to happen is we're going to take each character, repeat it, then place it into this variable here as a string. So let's go ahead and make a for loop. So for char in string. So for every element, or for every word that we pass in, every letter, sorry. That's right, every letter that gets passed in. Remember, we can iterate over a string. So for every individual word, that essentially, if I were to pass in, for example, the word hello here, what would happen is, first of all, we take out the H, and then that gets placed into char, for example. So now what we can do is we can say result equals result, which is this variable here, which is empty, plus the char. So what we do is we put that H into this variable here. And then what we can then do in actual fact is plus char again, because remember, char is going to be, in the first instance, if we pass in the word hello, it's going to be the letter H. So what we now have is stored in here is HH. And then of course we're going to loop over this again. So the next letter in the string is E in the word hello. So that gets placed into char. And what we do is we then add to this variable again, the letter E, then the letter E again. So now what we have is 2 H's and 2 E's, and then so on through the rest of the string. So we'll tidy that up in a short while, but all we need to do now is return the result. That's what's being stored. That's what's storing the new string. And then we can go ahead and print it out, pass in the word hello in this case, and let's just give that a go. So py, let's just run this file, and there we go. So we can amend this slightly because we can now change that to, for example, plus equals, and then this can be, for example, char times 2. So we can perform this type of multiplication on a string. So that's going to provide us 2 letters for each letter. So let's just try this again. And you can see that's performing and has the same outcome. If you did manage to solve the problem, well done. Let's move over now to having a look at the other solutions that we could possibly use here to solve this challenge. So here's a different solution. It's a little bit long-winded. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of these are more effective than any others. This is just purely for learning. So let's just go ahead and have a look at this. So we've got this function here called double char1, which takes in a string. So let's go ahead now and build a new variable here for a list string. So what we're doing here, x now represents a list, which is the string that we passed in. So it gets converted into a string. We cast it into a list, sorry. So we cast the string that we pass in into a list, and then we store it into x. Right, so we then have another list here, an empty list here called prep. Right, so now we also have output, which is going to hold a string. Okay, so let's start off with the first loop for I in range. So range is going to allow us to kind of specify how many times we're going to loop round. So we're going to get the length of X. So that's going to essentially what we're doing here is we're passing in, say for example, the word hello. So we're going to break up each letter, pass it into a list. So in our list now, we're going to have five letters in a list. Okay, so 5 elements, 5 components there in our list. So what we're doing here, the length now would be 5. So we're going to loop round this 5 times, say, right? So we're going to loop round. Every time we loop round, what we're going to do is we're going to prep append. So we're going to get this empty list here that we've created, and we're going to take the letter. So for each letter of the word hello, for example, we're going to take that letter and we're going to append. We're going to add it to this new list here called prep. And we can do that twice. So that means the first letter comes in, we loop round, that's H. So we add that twice to our new list here. So you can see what's going to happen now. We then do the next letter, then the next letter. So what happens is we then repeat those letters until we get a full list there with all the repeated letters. So 2 H's, 2 E's, 2 L's, 2 L's, 2 O's. Right, so now we have a list here prepared and ready to be outputted. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to loop around again. So we're going to loop around this list. So we get the length of this new list, which is going to be double of what we originally started with. And we're then going to kind of prepare the output. So for each of those items in that list, what we're going to do is we're going to prepare that. So we're going to put it in, let me bring this down. For each item that's in that list, we're going to loop through it the same amount of times as there is letters. This is why we're getting the length of that list. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get this string output, and then we're going to add each letter into that string. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking a list and then we're kind of converting it into a string, taking out each letter individually. So this is quite interesting for beginners to kind of see this process, what's going behind the scenes. We can definitely refactor this, but let's have a look at it this way first. So then we go ahead and we return the output. So once we've added all the letters to our string, we output the string, of course, and then we can then print the function again, and this time we're passing hello again. So we'll see that in action, and there we go. So we have the same output. So just to improve upon this code a little bit, we don't actually need this second loop here. What we can do is we can use join, of course. So I think we've used join on a previous challenge, or I think on the previous challenge. So let's go and utilize that. That was a good prompt in a previous challenge if you've looked at the previous challenge. So we can just basically use join, which will take all the items in our list, put it together nicely, and so that we can just output it as the word we see here. So let's give that a go, and there we go. So let's go for something a little bit more exotic. Now I have dropped this in the previous tutorial, and I've yet to build the tutorial as of making this tutorial on generators. So let's just do it anyway. So let's go ahead and make this double chart 3. So we saw what the example 2 was in the first example. So let's just pass in a string again. So what we're going to do now is we'll just use a generator. So I haven't explained this before on this channel. So we're just going to breeze through this to give you the idea. So this is going to be a generator. Now, I guess the general concept here is that we don't use return with a generator. We use yield. Okay, so we're going to yield x times 2. Right, so basically what we're doing here is passing the string as per normal. We'll create this loop here for x in string. So for every item in string, what we're going to do is take the item, times it by x, and then that's essentially then going to give us 2 of each. No, it's not. What am I talking about? 2 x times 2, sorry. That's right. So we're going to take each item and then times it by 2. Hopefully that is easy to read. So basically for each item in string, we loop through that each time, we get that, and then we basically times it by 2. So it gives us 2 letters of each. So now when we go and print this out, so let's go and print this out. So this is going to be double chart 3, And let's just pass in. This isn't going to work, but I'm just to show you really. Okay, so let's go into hello. So give that a go. And you notice here that we don't actually generate a result. We generate, or we return the generator. So we need to actually get the data within the generator or return that. So what we can do here is, well, let's go back here. So what we can do here, if we use join, for example, give that a go. So let's just join and then output, and there we go. So just briefly, what we've done there with join is we've iterated over, we've taken all the data, we've used join to kind of concatenate the strings, like it says here, and then it's outputted. Right, so that's one way of doing it, but of course, there is another way of us performing the same operation again with a generator. So let's have a look. So let's convert this into a generator expression. Let's go for, keep that in place. Let's go for new function name. And this time, let's just return join. So very similar to the previous code you saw, but this time slightly different notation. So x plus x for x in string. Okay, so let's give this a go. So we don't need to join here now because that's all performed in the return. Let's call that 4. And there we go. So if I haven't already done so, I do promise to get this generator tutorial out very soon, so I can start pointing you towards that. That's kind of a general idea here. I didn't want to go through all the mechanics of a generator if you didn't quite understand it, but like I said in the previous tutorial, I'm just trying to point you towards some different material, and you will find in the GitHub repository for this tutorial, there is a link there that would take you to, I think it'll take you to Real Python. Yeah, so there's a link to this page here. A great article about how to use generators and yield in Python. Definitely worth a read. Like it says here, it is intermediate. Completely agree with that. So just trying to get you to improve your knowledge of Python. So that's pretty much it for this one. I have forgotten testing. So let's just build a very simple test just for the fun of it. If you haven't started testing, this is really merely a prompt to make you start thinking about testing. So would we test this? The answer is probably no. Like there was a comment in the previous tutorial, but this is really just for the sake of it, just to kind of prompt you to start thinking about testing and to kind of start to give you some code, if you haven't started testing, to start thinking about testing because it's very important. So let's go ahead and import UnitTest. So at this point, you now know there's something called UnitTest. If you are completely new to Python and you are thinking about doing a little bit of testing, so UnitTest, a testing framework that we can utilize to build some tests for our code. So I will leave a link in the GitHub repository to that webpage again, so it's definitely worth a read. Definitely start thinking about testing if you haven't already started thinking about testing. So import UnitTest. So now what we're going to do is create a class here. I've called this test double methods. So trying to make it as descriptive as possible, so it's clear to anyone who would go to this page, make it nice and readable for anyone who does visit your tests. And here we're going to bring in unittest.testCase. So essentially what we're doing here is we are basically saying that you may find some functions in this class which are going to begin with the word test, and those are going to be tests that actually need testing. So essentially we're just telling Python that there's going to be tests in here. We're using unit tests, and we want to run some tests here. Right, so let's go ahead now and just create some, like we did in the previous. We're going to build some data to test. So we're going to pass in hello. We know that that should output H, H, E, E, L, 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 O, O. So we're going to pass in two things here. One is the actual string we want to double, and then the output that we're expecting. So let's just do that again. So let's go for world this time. O-O-R-L-D-D. So with tests, it's likely that you're going to need some data to test in some cases, particularly, for example, if your application uses a database. So here we've got some data. So let's go ahead and now create a new function. So it needs to begin with test underscore, and then let's give it a name. So in this case, we are going to call it doubles. So bring in self, that will allow us access to outside of this function here, or in this case, our param list. So let's go for 4, P1, P2. So it's very similar to the previous. If you didn't like that one, you won't like this one. So P1 and P2. So essentially what we're going to do here is we're going to get this item here as P1 and P2. So P1 is going to represent hello, and P2 is going to represent hello. And then when it loops over again, it will be world and then world here again. So in P1 and P2. So self, let's go and grab this data param list. Okay. So we're going to loop around that data. We're going to need it in. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So let's go for a subtest, self.subtest. So this isn't necessarily needed. And it's worth asking yourself, well, why isn't it needed, or why am I using it? And again, there will be a link in the description, which will help you understand why that is. So let's go ahead now and actually perform a test. So here we're going to use assert equal. And we're going to need a function, which is going to be the double char2. So we utilize that one. It doesn't really matter at this point. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass in P1 every loop to our function called double char. And then we're going to test essentially to check that the function is working properly. Again, like someone pointed out in the previous tutorial, this isn't necessarily something that you would test. It's not production worthy. This is just for fun, a little bit of knowledge. That you can start thinking about testing. So what we're going to do here is with assert equals, essentially we're taking two parameters here. This is what we're going to, this is the result that we're going to get from our function, and this is what we're going to test it against. So P1, which represents, for example, this word when we loop, that's going to be passed into this function here. That's obviously going to return this, or this string. So what we're now going to do is take P2, which represents this, and we're going to test it against the outcome of our function. Now, if they match, the test is going to pass. If they don't match, the test isn't going to pass. So that essentially just is going to test our function. So let's just bring back in our function. Again, this is all in the GitHub repository. So we'll use the result alternative here. Okay, so that function is going to perform the action of doubling. So let's go back down here. So what we want to do now is we want to run this test. So I did make a tutorial recently about if name. If name is equal to main. So if you don't know what that is, then head over to the tutorial about if name equals main. And I'll explain what that does. But essentially, that's going to run when we directly run this file. So what's happening here is before everything is run here, Python behind the scenes is going to set a variable called name, and that's going to be referenced, or that's going to store main as a string. So if it does, if we are running this file directly, say, then it's going to run this following piece of code, which is UnitTest.main, and that's basically just going to fire off the unit test, and then we're going to test what we've just set out to test. So we're just testing this function to make sure that it returns what it should, and this is what it should return. So we bring that all in and we test what is returned from the function with what we've identified here. So let's just give that a go. Okay, so we've got an error here. So what's that on line 9, unit test. I've forgotten T. And there we go. So we ran one test. It was successful. So we can just see that if we change this, for example, here, you can see that it's failed. So this is the outcome, and this is what we're testing it against. And you can see that's wrong. So everything is working okay. That's a simple test, and there we go. As per every tutorial, I do hope there was something there that was useful for you. Now, it might not be as Pythonic as you would liked. There may be some things missing there that maybe you have added. It's well worth in the comments just adding them, and I will add them to the GitHub repository. If there's anything you can think that will expand or help anyone else who might be learning Python, I would definitely add it or consider adding it to the GitHub repository to help everyone else, hopefully, who watches this tutorial. So again, thank you very much for listening, and I do hope to see you in the next Python Code Challenge.